Hello and welcome to this Insight Bytes video on leading through a crisis and beyond. And why are we discussing crisis leadership now is because this video is being recorded uh, in April 2020, where we are in the midst of one of the major crises that we have faced in a lifetime, the COVID-19 global crisis. And this crisis is more than just a health crisis, which it is of global proportions. It's also an imminent restructuring of the global economic system. Uh, a lot of things will fundamentally change. Your, processes, systems, and approaches to workplace safety and hygiene. Your notions of risk management, which have all been thrown out of the window through this crisis. Your understanding of what it means to have a robust IT infrastructure or connectivity and data management, which we saw a lot of gaps in when we suddenly had to put in a lot of people to work from home. The challenges of supply chain management, where you realize that you need to de-risk your supply chain in terms of having more redundancies and local supplies and things like that, and how you manage outsourcing and a lot of other things about how you run an organization. So for business leaders also it is a crisis that they have never seen before. And we also realize that this crisis has brought about a major discontinuity in terms of the normal shifting post the crisis. We all know that there's going to be a new normal after this crisis is over. And what we appreciate again from this crisis, which is very pervasive, is that for leading in a crisis, you not only have to bother about the immediate, visible, urgent things, you also have to take care of a lot of collateral, systemic things, which is what leaders are expected to do. Things which catch your attention are visible to everybody, but there are so many things which are enablers, and for that, leaders have to really look wider and find out what are the leverage points which will help the crisis to get over much faster. Uh, so, coming back to what do we mean by a crisis? A crisis is a sudden or evolving change that creates an urgent problem requiring immediate attention. You may or may not have contributed to it, you may or may not have anticipated it or warned about it. You might have the double misery of having warned about it and people not heeding your warnings, because not all warnings lead to a crisis, uh, but still having to cope with it. And very likely you don't have all the resources to control it, but you will still have to deal with it. And that is the pain of any leader. I mean, they are not responsible for a lot of the circumstances which they have to handle, but they have to take those situations uh, head on and tackle them. And why is leadership in a crisis very important? You need to appreciate that in a crisis, leadership becomes much more salient because the situation is very fluid. People are very confused and they are looking for some sense of direction. So the sense of autonomy that normally people feel is significantly reduced. And for you as a leader, you have multiple zones of influence, all of which you have to operate very effectively. In terms of managing yourself, you are the beacon of stability in an uncertain situation. Everybody looks to you for guidance and direction, and you are the hotspot of the emotional contagion. I mean, your confidence, hope, positivity, or negativity, both get rubs off on people very fast, because people are very vulnerable in time of crisis. Uh, how you deal with people is a very important aspect of leading people, and especially in a crisis, because of the cognitive overload of the complexity and overwhelm, people tend to respond more to emotional clues than to cognitive clues. So how you deal with them and how you address their concerns becomes very critical in terms of how they respond. And beyond managing yourself and leading people, in a situation where guidelines, protocols, all those things don't work, you also have to steer the organization, because you realize that the autopilot of the organization, its operating system, is no longer functioning properly. So people will look for guidance, and your role becomes more than just managing the crisis. You have to lead the people through it and into the future after it is over. So people are looking for direction not only for the current but also to address their uncertainties about what happens to us post the crisis. Uh, and you have to appreciate that, as the crisis sinks in and people somehow grapple with the current realities, their worries about the future might overwhelm them and become more important than what they're facing right now. And your role in terms of meeting those needs is very important, which is a very significant leadership role about caring for the future of the people. Uh, we as humans love stories. We love stories which inspire us and give us lessons on how we could cope with what we're facing right now. And I thought it appropriate that in this time I should also share insights on crisis management and leadership in a crisis by highlighting a crisis which gives us a lot of hope. Uh, this is a very famous case of a mining collapse that happened in the Atacama Desert of Chile way back in 2010. It's just about a decade back, where 33 miners, you can see all the 33 there, were stuck in a mine uh, practically around a kilometer below ground under rock, which was more than 500 tons of rock, meters of rock, which is harder than granite. And miraculously, I can share that even now, at the very beginning, they survived. They survived and were able to rescue after 69 days. And that story is a fascinating and inspiring story of how to lead in a crisis at multiple levels. The search and rescue timeline is shown below, but I'll walk you through it once again as we unravel the story. The trigger of this story was a mine collapse. On 5th August, a cave-in at the San Jose copper gold mine in northern Chile uh, left 33 people trapped under 700 meters of hard rock and no way of reaching them. They tried using some of the rescue chutes and ventilation shafts, which caused a further cave-in, and after which they had to abandon the immediate rescue plan that they had and really re-strategize on how to get those miners out. And that is what started the crisis. And you can imagine what happened in such a crisis. The families, the well-wishers, the press, everybody zeroed in on that collapse site, and it practically became a camping town kind of thing, because people refused to move from there. And this crisis has some very interesting lessons for us, because it's a crisis which operated, which was dealt with at multiple levels. On one level, there were the 33 miners who were trapped inside the mine. You can imagine their plight and the kind of things that would go on their mind. Then there were the engineers on the surface who were trying to find a way to rescue them. So the kind of challenge that their engineering skills and execution skills and innovation they were facing. And then there was the leadership of Chile managing the context for enabling this rescue effort, because it had become a national issue. There were already a lot of heartburn about mining companies and the kind of things that they were doing. So how did it play out? Within hours of the accident, the country's then recently elected president, Sebastian Pinera, announced, we will bring those men home, dead or alive, sparing no expenses. Now, this was a very clear and articulate statement of intention, which also very truthfully calibrated expectations in terms of possibly finding those people dead. But his intention to rescue them no matter what the cost sent a very clear signal. He came to the site, went along with his mining minister, and the mining minister stayed at this site and took a decision that he will stay at this site throughout the rescue period until this operation was over. Now, there's another very interesting story of leadership of Lawrence Goldman. He was also a former technocrat. He was an engineer who then did an MBA in US and went on to become the head of the largest departmental store chain of Chile. So he had tremendous managerial capability, but he had no experience of managing mines. They roped in the national-owned National Copper Corporation of Chile to take over the rescue because trust in the existing management of the company, the San Jose company, was very low. They didn't feel that they could really rescue them. And they hunted in for who would be the best people to steer this rescue effort from a technical engineering perspective, and located Andres Sogara, who was a very respected miner, head of one of the largest mines in Chile of Codelco, and known to be very cool under pressure. And to again reaffirm their intention and give him all kinds of support and reaffirm his primacy in the rescue effort, the president himself took him to the mine and introduced him to the people as the man who would lead the rescue efforts. Lawrence Goldman figured out that he will coordinate and manage the larger context of what kind of resource mobilization needs to be done to help the team work on the rescue effort. And again, if you look at how different levels of leaders responded to this crisis, you will realize that one of the aspects of the crisis was the execution challenge of how do we work out a scheme that will reach those miners and rescue them, and that tested a lot of innovative skills of the people. Andre brought in a crack team of 22 people who were respected and known to be the best in their fields, and he took people from multiple fields. He knew he needed people from diverse fields. He took miners, he took psychologists, he took communication experts, they took help from doctors, so on. And he ensured that people who were really needed were the ones who were there on the site. The others were told to stay slightly away and start working out on parallel plans, because they would be needed once the rescue operation started. Right now they need to figure out how to drill down and reach them. They didn't stop their search for ideas within their own limited location. Back in Chile, they set up a crisis center. They sent in SOSs to people across the globe, to whomsoever they thought would help, including people from NASA, mining multinationals like BHP, the Chilean Navy, who had experience of rescues, even places like United Parcel Services, and so on. After a wide search and thorough screening, they would get ideas from people, interview them, find out who could really help, and then invite them to come to the site and provide their technical expertise. So they got a very diverse group of experts from a very diverse set of backgrounds to help them in the rescue effort. So it is very important to appreciate that they acknowledged their limitations and started working around them. And then once they reached the site, they quickly broke those teams into many teams working on different aspects. And you just the data justified it, multiple approaches by different people on the similar problems. Whichever would work best would be adopted, because they were trying to desperately iterate as fast as they could to find a better, faster solution. And what they were also trying to do was manage this dichotomy of focus and the diversified search for ideas. Whoever had an idea was told to focus completely on that idea, and fresh ideas were given to fresh teams. So it was a race against time, which they were trying to manage. Let's look at the challenge from the perspective of the trapped miners. How did they cope? Their challenge was more psychological. Immediately after they came in, they realized they were stuck under a mountain and they had to figure out whether they would really survive or not. So this thought of that we'll die very quickly can quickly strike into your heart. So Louis Urzula, the mining mate who led them, the leader of this group, he immediately took stock of the situation, asked people to survey, check out what is the status of the mine, find out where they could find an air pocket, get some shelter, and started planning for surviving as long as they could uh, to buy time for a rescue. Uh, Again, uh, with the off chance that it might or might not be possible, to maintain their sanity and to ensure that people don't break down into chaos, they put a structure in place. They established a democracy of 33 people. He said in 33, 16 is a tie and the 33rd is the casting vote. They worked out rules on practically everything: food rations, work areas, roles for individuals. Now, he kept them busy on 12-hour shifts, in fact. Uh, he even tried to give structure in terms of time inside the mine where it was pitch dark, to use some mining equipment and create days and nights by switching on and off the headlights. Uh, they shared stories. They had prayers. They also tried to instill a philosophical acceptance of fate, because they also had to live with that possibility that they could die, and they didn't want anybody to go stark raving mad. Uh, he also used his training as a topographer to make detailed maps of the tunnels, because he knew that they had not been updated for many years, and if some mining rescue operation had to come in, they would need that data. And he was again preparing for that possibility that the data would be needed. And after the 17th date, when they were really discovered, he also coordinated with Sogarat on how to work out on the rescue, took data from him, took stock of the situation, what is happening above the ground, and they really actively contributed to their rescue rather than passively waiting to be rescued. So that's a very interesting thing about how do you take charge of a situation which appears to be hopeless. Uh, and what they did was something interesting in terms of how do you really cope with a crisis which apparently appears to be unmanageable. They converted the impossible task into possible by breaking it up into parts that they could get a handle on. They had one unsolvable problem: how do we extract 33 people trapped under 700 meters of rock before they die? Now this is impossible, but if we can convert it into two challenging problems: how do we quickly drill a small hole or a shaft to locate the miners and provide them with critical supplies? Then we can keep them alive, and then we can tackle the second problem of how do we drill a shaft wide enough to extract the miners. And taking these two tasks, again they split them up into different problems for taking on multiple approaches to foster innovative solutions. There were parallel problem solvings on complementary problems. Let's say when people were working on the rescue pod, there were 6 different designs of the rescue pod being worked out. When they were drilling for different routes, they were practically operating on 4 to 5 different routes to reach them through drills. Same thing when they went for the shaft. They even planned the sequence of rescue of those people. Of course, that planning was done once they were able to find out that they were alive. So what they did was at every stage they were working out their plans, reworking their plans, taking in light the new facts that were emerging. So they tried a lot of hit and miss runs, and they were updating people all the time about even their failures, very truthfully. And on day 17 they struck gold. The drill bit started giving some noise in terms of a very rhythmic banging, and they stopped all drilling to really figure out whether it was some error or it was somebody really tapping on the drill bit. What had happened was the drill bit had reached the miners. And they had been, the miners also had been surveying the mine inside to find out where the drill bit would get them. And they were hitting back, they're tapping on the drill bit to inform the people above ground that we're alive. So once they sensed the possibility that somebody was tapping on it, they stopped the drilling and paused for some time. And those miners actually put in a slip on the drill bit. And when the drill bit was withdrawn, you see that picture on the left. The president saying, "I got a message from the miners. We, the 33, are alive and well." And you can imagine the emotional upsurge that would have happened after knowing that what they had been hoping against hope for the last 17 days, it actually come true. Uh, and immediately they put into full gear the backup plans that they'd worked out for the rescue pods. And so plan A, on 26th day, one team started drilling a new escape route for those miners. While they were working at it, somewhere along the line, one young manager came to know about some new technology which he thought would be help them to drill faster. Uh, he was taken to Sogara, and Sogara, despite all his experience, gave him a very open hearing and said, "Fine, it sounds promising. You work on this." So day 31, they worked out what they call Plan B, and they said, "Fine, we'll go ahead with Plan A. You also go ahead with Plan B. Whosoever reaches first uh, will be used, and we can stop with the rest." They were still hunting for more solutions, and some people gave them some ideas about the oil industry having a lot of experience of doing drilling of large holes and things like that. So they were able to get a drill bit, an oil rig, to the site by day 45, and the oil rig also started drilling. And it was a race to reach the miners. And what happened was, on day 68, they finally reached the miners. And then again, it took some time to figure out a plan, a rescue process, and figure out who will come first and who will come later. They worked out the plan that the fittest person would be the one who would come first, because if some snag develops, he should be able to bear that shock. And they worked out some escape routes where if the capsule gets stuck, the miner can go back into the mine. The idea was get the strongest, fittest person first, because he has to go out and then he has to communicate back to the miners that I am alive and well, and after that they can start working on it. And then after that they started rescuing people in the order of fitness and health, with the weakest people being taken out first. And Ursula was the last person to come out. When he came out, the rescue was finally over, and they could declare that the mission has been accomplished. And this was an event which was watched by people on TV and on media, different media, by over 1 billion people across the globe. It had become such a major. So what were the outcomes and the long-term impact of this whole crisis? Those people were heroes. You are seeing a picture of the 33 with the president. You are seeing Louis Ursula. You're seeing the President Pinera with that. We the 33 are alive and well, and you're seeing a photograph of again Sogarat along with Lawrence Goulburn. The man in the helmet is Andre Sogarat, briefing the press. All these people became national heroes, not just national heroes, international heroes. Uh, on 13th October, the longest surviving mission in mining history was over. Uh, it had a long-term impact on the mining industry as well as Chile. There was a major overhaul of the mine safety regulators. They took a relook at plans to privatize Chile's public sector enterprise. Otherwise, the mood of the government prior to this accident was to quickly privatize all public sector enterprises. Now they had a rethink on that. Chile's economic standing improved in terms of how they handled this crisis, leading to greater investments. So it had a lot of implications, and it became a Harvard case and then an MIT article, and There were a lot of speaking assignments for those people. So there were a lot of books written with this case in mind, as a reference. Uh, so it gives us a lot of hope, and let's start exploring what are the insights on crisis leadership that we can pick up from this, uh, and that we can use not only in the current crisis, but any crisis that we face in an organization, because we are living in a VUCA world, and you can be hit by a crisis anytime. The key lessons in terms of managing yourself is to stay calm and be a calming influence. You need to sustain and develop habits that provide stability and structure to people around you. You also need to remember the Stockdale's paradox, which is to accept reality in all its darkness, not deny it, not get into denial, and still hope for a better future and start working for it, even though you're working on probabilities. The second issue is about situational awareness. Be aware and alive to the situation every day. Fresh data is coming in, fresh insights are coming in. You need to keep on being alive to that, because you can't really treat your plans as final. The situation is too fluid and too dynamic. Connect with others through compassion, because that will help you to connect with yourself through compassion. Otherwise, you are likely to get into high stress, burnout, feeling victimized because of the sheer stress of handling a crisis. You should also believe that there are others who will help you. Draw upon your strengths. Be aware of your limitations also. Seek help. The Chileans sought help everywhere. But you also draw upon your strengths in terms of what you have done in the past, what you have overcome in the past, and use the skill sets that you have acquired. Take responsibility and take decisions. In a crisis, leadership evidence is most visible in terms of people taking decisions. They might work, sometimes they go wrong, but people still appreciate the fact that you took that call. Persist. It's very important to persist, because people can see whether you're really trying your best or not. Sincerity in a crisis situation, authenticity matters even more than results, because failure, especially when failure is highly probable, it should be very clear that it is not for want of effort. In terms of leading and leveraging your people, you go beyond this apparent dichotomy between being a directive leader and an empowering leader. In a crisis, you will have to be both directive and empowering, and then you will have to keep on operating through this cycle of envisioning, enrolling, and engaging people. When you look at envisioning, it's about looking at, okay, what is the end state that you want, what is the future that you want, and figure out how do we reach there after acknowledging the stark realities of today. So direct and realistic assessment of the current situation, calibrate expectations, state the bare facts, even though they are, apparently they might demotivate people. People can see when you're fibbing. But at the same time, enable hope by showing the possibilities. Always, merge the starkness with the possibilities. Enrolling is about marshalling resources and marshalling the energy of your people. And again, what you need to do here is you need core expertise, you need depth, you need focus. At the same time, you need a wide search for solutions. So you need to do that boundary patrolling in terms of letting people work on their own domain and not really spreading themselves too thin. But at the same time, to get cross-functional solutions, you need to enable boundary spanning also. And how to calibrate these two is a very complex and nuanced job that leaders will have to take up. And that's where leaders start showing their mettle. In terms of engaging, is about how do you align the activities and energies of people. And again, you have this pressure of execution, processing things faster, but at the same time enabling a lot of the messiness and diversity and inefficiency that goes with innovation. So how do you manage both these processes is also very important. And in a crisis, you really need to complement both. And in terms of taking the organization forward, as I said, you really need to start figuring out, okay, what do we do going forward once this crisis is over? Because that also helps people to stay focused beyond their current misery to do something more hopeful. They need a motive for staying alive today. And McKinsey has given us a very interesting insight during their COVID-19 crisis is about the 5 Rs. What they shared is you need to develop resolve in terms of addressing the immediate challenges that the crisis represents to the workforce, customers, partners, your stakeholders. And you also need to develop resilience to meet the short-term aftermaths like the cash management or broader resiliency issues, which is what is going to happen post-COVID, and a lot of people are still coping with it. You also need to figure out how do you get back to normal. Could be a different normal, but again you have to get to some semblance of normality. You also need to figure out how do you reimagine the next normal, and then what a discontinuous shift looks like, and how we need to reinvent the organization. And normally in any crisis, your context also changes. The regulators, your stakeholders, they start behaving in a very different manner. Their expectations change. So how do you navigate that new space is also important, and you need to reform your own internal organization systems and processes to meet that new requirement. Post-COVID, a lot of those safety-related issues and health-related issues will require much more engagement with the civil authorities for industries than they had traditionally been doing. So after looking at these 5 Rs, you can give a direction to healing and ramping up after a crisis. So I hope you got some insights on how to manage and lead through a crisis and beyond from what we've shared in this video. This video was a summarization of a lot of research done on the issue of crisis management with recommendations from MIT SMR and HBR and all the global consultants, a lot of the resources that they made available free during the COVID-19 crisis, and you can see a lot of them curated on eabgyan.com, where we created a wiki on the crisis management. We studied a lot about the case study of the Copiaco mining accident in Chile. There were again, if you read the Wikipedia reading on that, or you would actually find it a very fascinating story. I have not given all the details in this video. You can also look at a YouTube video called Buried Alive, where you can visually see the journey of those 33 miners. And as I said, a lot of the stuff that I shared here in terms of conceptual inputs have been based on an HBR article, for which I've given you a link below. I hope you'll find it useful. I hope I've given you enough pointers to how to really lead through a crisis. But as I said, a crisis is only a point where leadership salience becomes higher. These skill sets can come in handy even beyond, and I hope you a life of leadership and without the kind of crisis that we are facing now. So thank you.